GTOBase and me, Tema2010. And today we're gonna talk to Philip Nice2meet885, one of the top coaches in Spin&Go's, and also a top high-stakes Spin&Go player since, I believe, 2013. We're gonna go over some hands, talk about his opponent's mistakes using our filters in GTOBase, and let's go. Okay, this is all-time hands. Probably I will be embarrassed for some of those, but anyways, let's see what's going on here. Okay, first check half pot. We need to point out that this is a monotone board, queen 10-4, and we can actually check behind here because it is going to be tough to make two pairs and play for 3 streets of value. Okay, 10 on the turn, we of course have an easy check, and our opponent bets queen 4. I don't know, probably a misclick from here, because of course queen 4 is the worst hand to bet here. Because first of all we block 4 and some of 4x combos with the spade, and we have the lowest queen, so we even lose to queen 5. So yeah, this is an easy check for him. I don't know, maybe he misjudged his hand. Or maybe he thought he has 3 pair. Yeah, could be that too, but anyway, I don't think we should take on this as a player pool mistake. Just a poorly played hand by one individual. Oh yeah, this one should be more interesting. Our opponent limps Jack 8 on a small blind. We check, board King, King, Jack double suited. And he bets Jack 8, but what's interesting here is that he actually should check this combo about 70% of the time. The thing is, he doesn't actually need a lot of protection with this hand, and he doesn't have a hand that can bet 3 streets for value. And if we take a look at our overall strategy, we see that hands like ace high, for example ace high with a spade, or hands like fours, threes, deuces, are much more beneficial to bet than a jack. And you can argue that by betting Jack X we get some value from his queen high combos, and that is correct, but he would most likely call queen high combos on the river as well, so we don't have to rush with getting value from his queen high combos. And we also allow him to improve some way by checking. The only reason I see to bet Jack 8 is to have some hands in our range to bluff catch on the river. As we see, we mostly check our Jack X combos, but the problem is if we only bet our King X combos and our bluffs, then we continue betting on the turn with our King X combos. We give up with some bluffs, and in the end we only have ace high combos to bluff catch on the river, and this is not very good, because our opponent has some mid-strength hands. So yeah, we can sometimes bet hands like Jack 8 to have some bluff catchers on the river, and of course after betting flop we will check all of our Jack X combos on the turn. As you see, we check all of them in theory, even hands like ace jack. So yeah, if we want to get 2 streets of value with our Jack X combos, we either bet flop and then probably bet river, or call his river bet, or we can bet turn, bet river. By checking on the flop, we somewhat cap his range, because we expect him to bet at least some of his King X combos. And again, if you bet flop, we only do that to skip the turn and continue playing on the river. And here on the river we can see that we have actually all of those Jack X combos to bluff catch, to call down, and without those our opponent can actually apply a lot of pressure on us. For example, if he realizes that he's very often ahead with his Jack X combos, he can easily overbet those, and he can also bluff a lot with his 10 high and queen high combos. But here, as we see, our opponent makes a mistake. He keeps on betting Jack 8 on the turn. I believe his logic was something along the lines of getting value from our Queen 10 combos, weaker Jack X combos, and some Queen high, 10 high flush draws. And he can actually get value from those, this is true. But actually, even if some action brings money, it doesn't mean that we should go for it. We should compare this action to all the others in terms of EV. And yeah, first of all, if he has a flush draw, he would probably bluff on the river, so we can get even more from flush draws by checking. And overall, we don't really want to value bet a hand. We cannot then value bet on the river. We only want to do that if our hand is extremely vulnerable. So yeah, we either bet flop and then check on the turn with an idea of bluff catching the river. We expect our opponent to float a lot on the flop with different hand, like 10x with a spade, hands like 8-7 for example with a spade, 9-8, 9-7 with a spade, and so on. And then bluff all those hands on the river, so we can bluff catch with our Jack-X combos. Or if we don't expect our opponent to float a lot on the flop, if we expect him to overfold on the flop, then of course we can bluff more, bet more with our air, but we want to check our Jack-X combos more. And then we bet for value on turn and river, and not flop and river. And on the river he still has to check because I can play a lot of King-X combos this way, and my range is basically uncapped. And actually a lot of people do cap their ranges in spots like that when we have quite a dynamic board, 2 flush draws and so on. And if we see people doing that, then we can actually increase our pro betting sizing on the river as a way of exploitation. Because his checking back range is going to be much weaker. People often do forget about the protection, and if for example we take a board like 10-9-5.
So you mean if we need more protection, like for example instead of King Jack we have a board like King 5 or King 6 with a pair of sixes, we want to bet more, right?
Yes, that's a very good point.
Yeah, I just want people to realize why we want to check Jack-X combos on a board like King Jack, but we still want to bet 6x combos on board like King 6.
Yes, when we bet on a flop like King 6 and our opponent calls, he still has a lot of combos like Jack 10, 10-9, 10-8 in his range, against which we want to protect our hand. And we want to bet more our 6x combos. We are still not betting hands like 7-6 for example, but we do bet hands like Queen 6 or Jack 6 and 7s, 8s, 9s and so on. And 10-6 for example in terms of hand strength is basically the same as Jack 8 on a King Jack 5 board. So yeah, here we fold out a lot of overcards like 10-9, 10-8, Jack 10, Jack 9 and so on. And when we bet Jack 8 on King Jack 5, we fold out hands like 7-6, which we are miles ahead of.
And in addition, if our opponent has a hand like, I don't know, 9-8 of spades, which he would probably fold on our pot bet on turn, he can then hit a pair on the river like 9 or 8, and if he doesn't want to turn this one into bluff, we can get some value now from his pairs. And when we have a pair of sixes, there is no opportunity basically for our opponent to hit an under pair. So yeah, with a pair of sixes we want to get value earlier, on earlier streets, and with a pair of jacks we want to get value later.
That's true. Next hand, 17 BBs, Queen 8 limp on the small blind, and he bets Queen 8 on the flop. I would rather pot control with this hand. Well, solver actually bets 52% of the time with this hand, but this is a very similar situation to the King Jack board. We cannot simply check all of our Queen X and 6x combos, because then our range is going to be too polarized, and we will have to fold a lot on the river against the pro bet. River pro bet is when we bet flop, he calls, check on the turn, and he bets on the river. And how would I exploit a range that is too polarized? I would just float a lot with hands like 10-9, 9-8, just a lot of hands, because I know that after he checks the turn he would most likely fold the river. And in order to protect against my aggressive pro betting on the river, he has to bet some of his mid-strength hands on the flop to use them as a bluff catcher on the river. But here he bets on the flop and then he continues betting small on the turn, and this is the worst, I believe, option for him. I understand his logic though. He wants to get some value from hands like Jack 9, Jack 10, 10 6, some weaker Queen X combos. But then again, even if we get some value from worse hands and the bet is actually plus EV, it doesn't mean that this is the best option. First of all, we can get value from those hands still on the river, so why hurry? If we check turn, hands like Jack 9, Jack 10, 10 6, like Queen 3 would more likely call our bet, since by checking turn we represent a much narrower range, narrower value range. Most players expect us to continue betting with our strong hands. So even in terms of credibility, it is probably more beneficial to bet river. And again, we bet flop with our queen, expecting our opponent to float hands like 9-7, 8-7, 7-5, hands with a club, and so on. But if we do not expect him to call those hands, then we probably don't have a reason to bet our queen X combos in the first place. Instead, we should check our Queen X combos, hoping our opponent catch a pair with a hand like 9-7 and pays off. So yeah, even if the boards are quite different, King, King, Jack and King, Queen, 6, we see the same mistake. Our opponent sees a value potential with his mid-strength hand and he bets instead of checking. Intuitively it seems right because there are hands we can get value from, but strategically, if we take a look at our range overall, we actually miss on some value by betting. Because those hands we get value from on the turn, we can still get value on the river, but we don't give our opponent an opportunity to bluff.
So he picks a less profitable line.
Yeah, exactly.
He picks a line where we get a cookie, but the other line actually grants us 3 cookies instead of 1, and he doesn't see it.
The biggest problem for many people is that they hurry too much to get some value, where instead they should play more passively.
Yeah, and the other problem for many people is that they see hands they beat, but they ignore hands that they lose to. For example, he sees hands like 10-6 or 10 with a flush draw he can get value from, but he ignores hands like King X, weaker King X, some Queen X that are better, like Queen 10, Queen 9 that would most likely be still better on the river. And they ignore the fact that those hands can comprise a big part of opponent's range, bigger than those hands that we beat. And this already makes our value bet at least questionable. And we also fold out some of his flush draws that are going to probably bluff on the river. And more often than not, those flush draws do not complete on the river. So yeah, taking all of it into account, checking turn and betting or calling river is better.
Yeah, sure. And if you take a look at our situation again, he can say that he was right, considering we had Queen 4. But by betting a half pot, he makes his hand obvious, because all of his strong hands want to bet full pot. So if I have a flush draw, for example, I can check raise against this half pot bet. Or I can check raise a hand like 10-8 with a club, or just a plain 6. So yeah, by using this sizing, he actually gives me an opportunity to put pressure on him. But if he checks turn and we have this 3 of clubs on the river, he can still get same amount of value from my Queen 4. And if it happened to be 3 of a different suit, he can actually get even more value. Plus, by checking turn, he gets more value from my floats I can use as a bluff. And if you think that your opponent would simply never float on the flop with weaker hands, then again, we have no reason to bet flop. Okay, a limped pot, 12 BBs, Ace-6 suited. There are a lot of limp traps with shallower stacks. Anyways, big blind checks. Then we have bet call on 9-3 deuce monotone. Check on the turn. It's an interesting slow play with the nut flush. I don't think we have some sort of a field mistake here, player pool mistake or anything like that. This is more of a personal thing. He probably thinks that with blocking a 6, he also blocks combos like a 6-4, 6-5 he can get value from. So he decides to check, but his hand is way too strong to slow play. He has a clear 3 streets play for value. Usually we want to slow play in a spot like this when the SPR is short, is low, and we don't lose any value by checking back. In that case, yeah, there is a reason to slow play.
With lower SPR we can still compensate on the river for this check.
Yes, exactly. For example, in this case, if we get a check raise on the flop and we call it, then we can slow play. This hand does not flush on the turn because the SPR is quite lower.
Hey, it's also interesting for me if we can actually defend here hands like 6-5 or 6-4 without a diamond. How much equity do we have and can we allow ourselves to call those hands?
Well, you're going into details and I wanted to show here what happens if we actually check raise on the flop. Our opponent check raises on the flop, we call. Then we have 7 blinds in the pot on the turn and 8.5 in stacks. In this case, we can slow play.
Oh yeah, I get it. We have one bet left basically, so we can shove turn or river. We don't care.
Yeah, in this case we can easily slow play, but in our hand, in our actual hand, the SPR is too high and we want to bet 3 streets for value with our nut flush. And I get the idea, he also wants to protect his checking range, but there's no need to use nut flushes to protect checking range. It is the same if opponent raises on the button and we just call on big blind with aces because we want to protect our calling range. We can easily protect our big blind calling range by just calling tighter, by calling a lot of mid-strength hands, which are going to be actually strong on different boards and protect us this way. And yeah, we would still be capped on some higher boards, but then again, 3-betting aces is still much more profitable. And here, same thing, he has other hands to protect his checking range, like some 9x, 6x, what else?
Yeah, 9x, 6x, we want to check to bluff catch, right?
Yeah, right, he can also check like 6-3 for example.
Our goal basically is to catch his bluffs on the river, and if he actually wants to protect against our stronger hands, he can call hands like King 6, for example.
Yeah, or King 6 or aces, kings without a diamond.
Yeah, kings with a diamond, 10-9 with a diamond, to not be afraid of a diamond river.
Oh no, you get this part wrong. We want to bet our kings with a diamond actually, and we want to check kings without a diamond.
Oh yeah, I get it. Kings without a diamond have less equity and we don't want to get raised. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I say in his mind it is better to bet a hand like King X with a diamond. Not kings with a diamond, but like King 6 with the King of Diamond. So this way he is protected against a diamond river. So if he doesn't want to bet ace 6 of diamonds, right, he then prefers to bet hands like this.
Yeah, I get it now. This is a completely wrong logic and quite a popular mistake actually. People often check hands like kings with a diamond because they think they don't need any protection. Also hands like a6 of diamonds like here, right? And they prefer betting kings without a diamond because they need a lot of protection. But first of all, diamond river is not necessarily a bad one for us. And basically this strategy is based on fear. And anytime you use a strategy that is based on fear, it's not very good. Well, actually, a diamond could be the best river card for you if, for example, your opponent overbluffs deuces. Because as we see, he should sometimes bluff some of his 3x and deuce x combos. And he also should value bet really thinly on this river card, and some people would bluff 3x and deuce x combos because 10 of diamonds is a scary card, but they won't value bet enough with like small flushes. So in this case, pocket kings is a happy call for us. So yeah, Diamond River is not a great one for us, but it could be actually a good one, a really beneficial one if our opponent likes turning pairs into bluff on dangerous cards that complete different draws.
Yeah, and we actually picked a6 on the turn, which helps him a lot, which completes combos like 5-4, 5-6, 4-6. If we went with like 7 or 8, he would have all those combos as a potential bluff on the river as well.
Yeah, but the main idea here is that when we want to protect our checking range, we want to use hands that cannot actually bet 3 streets for value.
Yeah, I get it. Hands that have 2 streets of value instead of 3.
Well, which hands we would open limp on the small blind 20 bb's deep? Hands like ace 10, ace 9 offsuit. Well, just because we don't want to grow the pot with hands like this. At the same time, we won't open limp aces with 20 bb's deep. And if we bet kings here, for example, there are not so many river cards we can safely value bet again. But of course we can't value bet 5 or 4, and even 7 is not a great card for us to value bet kings. Well, we still bet.
Yeah, we bet, but we mostly use the smaller sizing here, as I see. We still bet, but we bet smaller.
Yeah, and there's no difference between betting and checking in terms of EV, so it's a very thin value bet.
There are also some solver calls, so to speak, right?
Yeah, calls like A3, come on.
So yeah, against the feel, it is not a very good bet for us, it seems.
Yeah, and if you think that your opponent overbluffs, it is better to check kings without a diamond or some 9x without a diamond. And yeah, I realize that rivers sometimes bring a bad card for us and we have to make a really tough decision. It is true, but if you bet half pot and your opponent shoves and you call and he shows a straight, a flush or 2 pair, it's a bad situation as well. And you might say that this is just a cooler, but it's not. You actually had real options to avoid this. Okay, next hand, open limp, king 8, we can either raise or check. This time we check on the flop, check, bet, call. Yeah, nice hand to bet actually. And oh my god, check again on the turn. Well, basically the same mistake. This hand is just way too good for him to check it. If you want to slow play, if you want to protect your checking range, it is much better to check a hand like Queen 5, for example. Or we can check tens or bottom 2 pair. 8-4 is a fine candidate to slow play. Again, Queen 5, Queen 6, Queen 7.
Well, yeah, same logic, right? We often won't be able to bet 3 streets.
Yeah, and our nutted hands we just want to bet. There are some exceptions. We sometimes want to slow play hands that block a lot in our opponent calling range, like top set, but even top set here we bet 100% of the time. But the EV difference between checking and betting is not so big, 587 against 595. But then again, we block a lot of his calling range, and with Jack 9 of diamonds, we don't really block his calling range. We don't block any pair, so yeah, it is not that hard to get 3 streets of value. And yeah, in this particular case, it worked really fine for him because he allowed me to catch up. I had 2 pair on the river, but against my range overall, I would say that he definitely loses money when he slow plays a hand like that.
Yeah, and the most interesting part is that he checks turn because he wants to get more value from you on the river, but all of your like 10x combos, 8x combos, 4x combos are not happy about a lot of river cards. So you won't often pay off his big bets. So yeah, a lot of river cards are scary for both players and even more for the big blind because he has a weaker range to begin with. So if he has a hand like Jack 8, for example, or Jack 4, and there is a king on the river, we would most likely just fold against a big bet. So in his shoes, I wouldn't really rely on getting paid on the river a lot.
Yeah, but the root of the problem, I think, is that he chooses his hands to slow play incorrectly. He knows that this is basically a stone cold nuts and he will have an easy decision on the river, but this is a poor choice of hands. Almost always we want to bet our strongest hands. The only exceptions are a very low SPR and huge blockers to our opponent's calling range.
Yeah, basically it has to be a very narrow range for our opponent, and he has to bet like 10 times the pot against a check for the slow play to be more profitable than betting ourselves.
Yeah, and if we check Jack 9 because our opponent overbets 10 times the pot against the check, we should also check other value hands like King Queen. Well, basically all of our value range we should check.
Yeah, then it is more profitable to check every value hand in our range.
Yeah, and usually people bet King Queen here because they are afraid to see a bet river card. And yeah, just so you know, every time you pick an action just because you are afraid of certain things, because you will be uncomfortable in some of the following situations, your logic is most likely flawed and your strategy is not very good. It is based on your feelings and your emotions and not logic.
Yeah, I often tell my students that if you don't know how to play in a certain spot, it is better to ask someone. You can ask a coach or you can ask a solver, for example, just to be certain that you have to actually see bet in a certain spot. And even if you are afraid of your opponent's raise, you still have to see bet because otherwise you leave some money on the table. You are afraid of this imaginable raise, you don't know how to play against it, so you check. Well, in this case, his logic was different, of course, but then again, it's another problem. When you play against someone who is famous, who is really good, you start making stuff up. You come up with some strange lines. For example, here he thought that you may catch up or you may pro bet on the river and then he shoves and so on. And this way he can make a lot of money, but of course there was no math behind this, logic behind this thinking. And it is a common problem. People try to level their opponents, but end up leveling themselves and losing a lot of money with traps like this.
Okay, next hand, limp check, check on the flop, deuce probably bets, yes. Stacks are quite deep, 30 BBs, and we actually should know that deuce checks 36% of the time. The idea is that, as weird as it sounds, we might not be able to value bet on some river cards. And again, stacks are quite deep, 30 BBs. So yeah, it's going to be quite hard to bet 3 times for value, even with the trips. You might hear that against the bet, deuce is mostly calling, raising sometimes as well, of course, but mostly calling. And to understand why, we should think about what are we facing here. What our opponent bets. What does he want to bet? Does he want to bet a jack here? Not so much, because jack doesn't actually need any protection. So it's mostly deuce X combos, some air, some ace high combos, but not a lot also. And let's say we check raise, then our opponent calls with a range that consists mostly of deuce X combos, ace high combos, combo draws, and some backdoors. And if you get a 7 of diamonds, for example, on the turn, deuce X combos are mostly checking now, or block betting. They can't even bet half pot for value. This is how weak those hands are comparing to bet calling range. Bet calling range on the flop is extremely polarized. And if we continue betting on the turn, our opponent even have to fold some of his jack X combos in theory. So why would you bet again? You expect him to call jack X and continue calling jack X's. He probably would fold most of them on the flop already. So yeah, there's nothing to get value from, so you basically value taunt yourself. And on the river, we see all the deuce X combos are checking now. And this is not a slow play. If our opponent shoves, we have to fold some of those deuce X combos.
Well, yeah, it seems that he doesn't have any bluff candidates. I mean, yeah, some king X combos with a diamond, right? Some hands like that, ace king and so on. But it's almost nothing comparing to deuce X combos and flushes.
Yeah, but the main problem is that people raise deuce X because they think it's a strong hand and they want to grow the pot. And then again, we have to realize that we mostly raise on the flop when against a small bet, when our opponent has a lot of hands in his range that he is planning to check behind on the turn, but he would still call against our raise on the flop. Yes, in this case, we want to raise a lot, because we just don't want to give him free cards. Because it's often like...
you know what, let's take a look at how much equity do we have against his calling range. Well, we have 82%. This is actually quite fine against his calling range on the flop. So the main problem, it seems, is in the potential runouts.
Oh yeah, 82%, but we have to play out of position 30 BBs deep. But if we take a look at our Jack-X combos equity...
Yeah, we saw it already. It has around 52% or so. So basically we are 50-50 against his calling range with our Jack-X combos.
So yeah, no reason to grow the pot.
Yeah, even before seeing the turn card, we are already 50-50 against his calling range. So there's definitely no value to be gained on turns and rivers.
Okay, bet call on the flop, and he continues betting on the turn. Well, actually, this is a very tricky spot. And it's really hard to accuse our opponent for picking this line.
Yeah, but EV loss is quite high, minus 50 BBs per 100.
Yeah, well, I mean, you see, my decision to donk on the river is minus 93 BBs per 100. Even worse, but I thought that I have some 10x combos in my range, I have some flushes. I would not donk bet flush, of course, but it's sort of a bottom part of my range. And I thought that he won't bet his deuce x combos. So yeah, I decided to donk, and he found a call with 9 deuce. Well, the problem is that if he bets a lot, I have to probably fold my Jack-X combos a lot. Oh, no, not so much actually.
You should probably pick overbet, because pot bet is almost never used.
Yeah, we fold some of the Jack-X combos, a lot of them actually. So I think...
And we should probably fold combos with a diamond, because we are blocking his bluffing range, blocking his busted draws. He should probably use as a bluff.
Well, you see, usually the difference between solver ranges and real players' ranges is huge. So I don't think it's that important in practice. So yeah, he basically overestimated the strength of his hand here, but then again, I think most of the players would do the same in his shoes.
Yeah, and all of this considering that you are supposed to call some of these 10x combos on the turn, and not every player would call them. So yeah, that makes turn calling range even narrower.
Well, yeah, solver think that in this case, comparing to a board like King, King, Jack 5, he basically chops with most of my deuce x combos. I mean, I'm still beating here with like Queen Deuce. But against most of them he chops, and he can't value bet on the river anymore without a kicker that actually plays. Because I will have folded already some of my Jack-X's on the turn, and I will fold basically the rest on the river, on most of them. So there's nothing to gain value from. I will mostly call with hands stronger or chops. So this is why solver offers to either use a smaller sizing or just check this hand. Because again, he can't bet 3 streets for value with this hand. But this is specific to deeper stack plays. Okay, here our opponent decided to thinly value bet 10-3, right? Yeah, it seems so. Limp check, check bet call, check bet on turn. Yeah, this is definitely a mistake to bet again on Queen Deuce 3-4. Again, the idea of betting flop with this hand is to get some protection, and then possibly a bluff catch on the river. Well, maybe he visualized this in a way that I would call 3-5, 3-6 and some 3x combos with a club, and fold hands like Jack 3. But this is a very specific visualization, and actually 10-3 is quite a simple, quite an easy check on the turn. I have a lot of Queen X combos.
Yeah, and you also have a lot of 4x combos that are now ahead of his hand.
And yeah, I am not necessarily going to fold Jack 3. and I didn't in this hand. But if you catch two pairs on the river, then it's much easier.
Yeah, he knew what's coming,
he knew
so
what's
he
coming,
just wanted to
so
call the pot.
he, yeah, in this case, it's a very good line. And yeah, on the river, as you see, it is a 100% call for me. I have one of the best combos to call here, actually, because Jack is a high card, and he would check back on the flop with most of his Jack high combos. Well, not most of it, but a decent part. So his bluffing range on the river will mostly be comprised of hands like 9-6, 8-6, 8-5 and hands of this nature. So yeah, in spots like this, to bluff catch we want to mostly block high cards like Jack or King and so on, because our opponent would rarely use them as a bluff. But in a button versus big blind spot, on the contrary, we don't want to block big cards when we decide if to bluff catch or not, because he will use them as a bluff, as these hands are the only ones that are left in his range for bluffing. Simply because he is not opening a lot of low cards. Okay, ace-5, limp check, then 5-4, check, bet, call. On the turn, check, bet. I don't think it is a big of a mistake as solver thinks it is. And if we bet half pot instead of 3/4, it already seems fine. So yeah, I wouldn't say it is a big mistake. He bets his second pair with a decent kicker. I think it's mostly about us playing deeper stacks. And also I think it has something to do with the fact that he mostly uses pot bet as his main sizing. And maybe there are not so many value hands he can stuff into betting 3/4. And again, mostly he bets flop with this hand to then check turn and get some value from opponent's probe bets on the river. But I would not say that this is a big mistake. And also 3 on the turn completes some straight draws. If you had a board like 10-7-3 with a deuce on turn, I think solver would keep on barreling. So yeah, the problem is that 6 deuce and 6-7 now have a straight, and there are a lot of pair plus draw combos in opponent's range, so we don't have enough equity to bet. But on board like 10-6-5 deuce, I think we keep betting.
Yeah, and also we probably get a lot of bluffs from our opponent on the river.
Well, I think it's mostly about our hand being too weak to bet here. Jack 3, limp check, check bet call. And now he turns into bluff his fourth pair on a ace king 9-3 board. My god. Well, actually it would be fine, it would be okay if it wasn't for the ace high board. But yeah, sometimes solver does turn a fourth pair into a bluff, but again not on ace high board, because here, because since I don't have a lot of ace x combos in my range, I will call hands like queen high, jack high with backdoors, and in fact his 3x combo has a lot of showdown value. Way too much showdown value to be turning this hand into bluff. And also he has a lot of trash, a lot of air hands like 7-5, 7-6 and so on that he can use as a bluff. If the board was like king 10-5 and then 3 on the turn, then it would look much better, because he can still get some value from my queen jack combos, and he can also fold out hands like 5x. Because in the end of the day, the main reason to turn your fourth pair into a bluff is to fold third pairs and to get some value from draws with a showdown value. But here, first of all, we don't have a lot of draws with showdown value. Hands like queen jack, queen 10 suited, we would most likely ISO pre-flop, and I won't fold 9x combos a lot. I'd fold my queen high, jack high combos, but 9x is, yeah, mostly calling. And why would you bluff fourth pair if you can't fold out a third pair? And yeah, if he folds out my queen high and jack high combos, then he should use hands like 6-7 or 6-5 offsuit as a bluff. So yeah, it is a check for him, or he can use this weird small betting line that solver suggests, But for this line to be profitable, a big blind has to play pretty much perfectly. If we take a look on a big blind's range, we see that a lot of King X hands are missing here, because most of them are isolated preflop. We only see 2 offsuit kings and some suited. And there are only 4 suited combos for every hand and 12 offsuit ones. Plus we have a king on the board, so yeah, not a lot of King X and Ace X combos in big blind's range. And now, if small blind bets, we see a lot of weird stuff going on in our strategy. For example, we begin to raise some of our 9x combos, King X combos, Queen X combos. And it is weird actually, because it is very natural to just call our 9x combos and our Queen High combos. I mean, it's natural for pretty much everybody, I think. And against the range bet, let's take a look at small blind's range for a second. He also doesn't have a lot of Ace X combos and King X combos, offsuit Ace X and King X combos. And it is actually very tough to explain this stuff to anyone who doesn't play a lot of short stack heads up. Because there are a couple of concepts that are going on here simultaneously. First, a small blind has a very wide range, and our 9x combos are actually quite decent against this range, almost 70% equity. So if we raise, he actually has to call a lot of his 9x combos, some Queen High combos, Jack High combos, hands like 10-7, and those are not the worst hands in his calling range. So yeah, this way we get a lot of value, and he doesn't actually have a lot of hands that beat us. Only 18% of his range are hands that are ahead. And those are the hands that we actually beat, and as you see, he has to call a lot of them. A lot of Queen High combos, Jack High combos, 10 High combos, hands like 5-3 of hearts even. Okay, this was concept number 1, now concept number 2. First of all, 9x is quite a strong hand actually for the big blind, well, not very strong, right, but decent. And the second concept is that the shallower the stacks are, the lower the SPR, the more aggressively we can stack off out of position. Well, first of all, we can always stack off more aggressively when we are out of position, because when we are in position, we have to compare the EV of gem to the EV of check. And EV of checking is at least 0 EV, but oftentimes if we have at least some sort of a equity, right, we have more than 0. And for us to be able to value bet profitably, we need our opponent to call at least 50% of hands that are worse than our hand. Well, basically we need to win more than lose against his calling range if we want to value bet in position. Because we always have an alternative to check behind our hand and to realize 100% of our equity. Since if we check back on the river, our opponent can't bluff anymore. But out of position, oftentimes we have to bet even if we are losing more than winning against his calling range. Because the alternative is to check and to possibly face a bet. And if we have to call his bet right after checking because of the pot odds, it is better actually for us to bet this hand ourselves sometimes. So we bet and we stack off having like 40% equity against check calling having like 34% equity, just because we have to check call because of pot odds. And this never happens in position. So here, if we have to check call our 9x combos anyways, we can also sometimes check raise it. And this is what Solver does. He always compares EVs of different lines. So yeah, first of all, our opponent doesn't have a lot of Ace X and King X combos in his range, and he bets 100%. And second, we have short stacks and we are out of position. So we can value raise and stack off much thinner than in position. Well, because if we compare check calling to check raising, we still have to check call pretty much always if we never check raise, for example, right? And we still lose a lot to his King X and Ace X combos. So if out of position player check calls here on the flop, his range is very capped. And if I'm not mistaken, in position player can now bet on turn his 6s, his 5s for value, even his king-queen, queen-jack combos for value. So pretty much queen high. Well, let's see, 3 of diamonds on the turn. He could probably value bet his 3x combos. Yeah, he should be able to value bet 3x combos, 5s, 6s, right? And queen jack, queen 10 as well. And even queen 8 as well. Yeah, this one goes goes in as well. Because again, out of position player has to pretty much check raise most of his king x and 9x combos. And I think we can still check raise our 9x combos against a bet on the turn. So basically our check call on the flop with the 9 is a form of a slow play. Yeah, we can induce him with a 9. Yeah, that's right. We induce some thinner value bets on turn. I don't really know how much of what I've just said people understood, but yeah, this is how it works, and we actually have to check raise some of our 9x combos. But it is a very tricky concept. The first concept is not very specific and very important actually. Meaning that we have to value bet more thinly when we are out of position, and this is why we sometimes use a block bet probe on the river, like water pot or third pot, and we pretty much never block bet on the river in position. Because if we block bet in position on the river, it basically means that we are not able to bet bigger for value, so we are behind 30-35% of his calling range. But if you don't have enough equity to bet bigger, and there is an opportunity, even a small one, that our opponent can bluff raise, it is more profitable for us to simply check back. We always have an option to realize 100% of our equity, and this is why we value bet much tighter in position. But out of position, the EV of our check is much worse, much lower, because we need to hope then that our opponent won't bet against our check. Plus his hand has to be worse than ours. In position, if our hand is stronger, we win 100% by checking.
And also this way we decide the price of this last street, right?
Yes, and since solver knows that checking is worse than betting, he prefers betting, even though betting is not a great option also. Well, it is like when you don't want to do anything and you are lazy, but you know that procrastination is even worse, and you go ahead and you face your problems even though you don't really want to do that. Or like if you can't fight the protesters, it is better to join them, right? Pretty much same logic.
Yeah, and if you want to watch YouTube, you can watch what we actually want to watch and not what is recommended.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. It was very informative for me, and I'm sure for our viewers as well. And I think it would be great to do it in the future as well, maybe with some different topics, right?
Yes, sure.
Thank you for coming. Bye.